We do not condone torture. I have never ordered torture. I will never order torture.
At first glance, it's a typical home video. But tragedy was about to strike this man and his family, an incident that would change his life for years to come. This is the story of Sami Al Haj, the AlJazeera cameraman held in Guantanamo since mid-2002.
Baba, Habib, Baba.
Sami had come to Damascus from Doha after completing a training course there. He was spending a holiday with his family, who had joined him from Sudan. Muhammad, Sami's only child, takes his first steps. Sami met his wife Asma in Azerbaijan through a Sudanese family. Sami had worked with the father of the family in the Emirates. After this meeting, Sami had to go back to Doha to start his new job at AlJazeera, leaving Asma and their son to return to Azerbaijan. This was to be the last time Sami would kiss Muhammad, his son. Within a few months, the only kisses he'd be able to give would be by letters sent from the strangest prison in the world. By now, the Americans had completed their preparations for the attack on Afghanistan in response to 9/11. The goal? To take out the Taliban regime and arrest the head of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden. A week after returning to Doha, Sami signed his employment contract with the AlJazeera channel. 3 days later, on the 10th of October 2001, it was decided to send him to Afghanistan to cover the war there.
في تلك المرحلة الإدارة كلفتني أن أذهب إلى قندهار لتغطية الأحداث هناك، وسألت من سيكون المصور اللي سيرافقني، فقيل لي زميل اسمه سامي الحاج.
After an exhausting journey, negotiating difficult mountain roads, Sami and Yusuf arrived by night at Kandahar and shared a house with a camera crew from CNN.
Sami was in the same compound, and what I remember of him, he was a very hard-working cameraman. You needed a lot of guts to do photography, to film on the streets of Kandahar, and particularly to cover the bombardment, because that's always such a big threat.
He seemed like a guy that was just starting out to me, that he was very curious, full of hope. You know, I remember us talking about how important it was for us to be there as journalists, to be able to document this. We all felt at the time it was, you know, a huge news event that would change forever the way Afghanistan was viewed by the world.
Overall, if you really look at it, I think he was a thorough professional, and I was very impressed. I mean, even though I was working for CNN at that time, I was very impressed with Sami because he was a very hard-working cameraman.
Kandahar was the Americans' main target and was bombarded relentlessly. It was here that the Taliban were to be broken. The situation became critical. The journalists faced a stark choice: either leave or stay and face possible life-threatening consequences.
حاولنا أن ننتقل إلى نغادر قندهار، وقالت لنا الإدارة: أنتم أحرار، إذا وجدتم أن الوقت يستدعي أن تغادروا فأنتم أحرار. فCNN قررت المغادرة، وفعلا حاولوا غادروا. فقلنا نحن ننتظر يوم أو يومين لنرى، لكن وجدنا أنه بعد يومين بقائنا سيكون محفوف بالمخاطر، وفعلا غادرنا إلى سبين بولدك.
At about this time, another of Sami's colleagues, Abdul Haq Saddah, was preparing to leave for Afghanistan to head the AlJazeera bureau after Yusuf Sholi's return to Doha. On the 15th of December, after a 3-day wait in Quetta for the necessary Pakistani visas and permits, Abdul Haq and Sami headed for the Shaman Pass on their way to Kandahar, which had just fallen to the Americans and their allies. They had no idea what was in store for them.
عند دخولنا المركز الحدودي سلمنا جوازات السفر بشكل عادي كما كنا نفعل كل مرة. أخذ الجوازان إلى غرفة ثانية وبقينا ننتظر في غرفة الانتظار. بعدها بلحظات قليلة عاد ضابط المركز الحدودي وبيده الجوازين، وكان متوجما وكان غاضبا وشكله تغير تماما، وكأن الأمر يتعلق بشخص ثاني غير الذي أخذ من الجوازين. تحدث إلي بالنبرة التالية، وكانت نبرة شديدة جدا: إذا كنت تريد أن تدخل إلى أفغانستان اذهب، فليس لنا حاجة بك، لكن بالنسبة لزميلك سامي الحاج سيبقى معنا لأنه مطلوب.
The border guard's curious behavior was prompted by a secret letter from Pakistani intelligence.
بعد جدال طويل أيضا سمح لنا الضابط برؤية الرسالة، وقد تمكنت من قراءة بعض الأسطر فيها هكذا على عجل، وفعلا كان فيها طلب لكل المراكز الحدودية الباكستانية: إذا مر هذا الشخص اللي هو سامي الحاج رقم الجواز الفلاني الصادر بالمكان الفلاني في التاريخ الفلاني، يرجو التحفظ عليه في المركز الحدودي إلى حين إبلاغ قيادة المخابرات الباكستانية للاشتباه في علاقته بتنظيم القاعدة. يعني تفاجأت والتفت إلى سامي، هو أيضا نظر إلى الرسالة عن بعد وبشكل سريع. أول ما لاحظه سامي قال لأن هذا الجواز ليس جوازه الذي معه. الجواز الرقم والمكان الإصدار وتاريخ الإصدار يعود إلى جواز سابق كان سامي قد أضاعه في السودان وقد استصدر بشأنه تصريحا بالضياع.
This statement issued by the Sudanese Interior Ministry shows that Sami Al Haj had reported the loss of his passport in order to obtain a new one. The team was unable to convince Major Nadim, the intelligence representative, that Sami was innocent of the crime mentioned in the letter. The major decided to hold him, and Sami spent his first night in prison, hoping that the matter would be cleared up the next day.
في اليوم الثاني صباحا التحقت بالمركز الحدودي مرة ثانية لأطمئن على سامي. لحظة وصولي إلى المركز كان سامي يتحرك مع الميجر نديم سيارة المخابرات، فاستوقفت الميجر نديم، قلت له إلى أين تأخذه؟ قال لي لا، الأمر يتعلق باستيضاح الأمر الذي تكلمنا عنه وهو قضية الجواز، وسيعود حالما تنتهي هذه التدقيقات. صعد سامي في السيارة مع الميجر نديم غير مكبل ولا تبدو عليه علامات الإساءة إطلاقا، وغادر المركز الحدودي، ومن حينها لم أرى سامي إلى اليوم.
Sami was held by Pakistani intelligence for 23 days, during which the management of AlJazeera contacted the Pakistani authorities, but to no avail. Sami asked the guards for permission to call his wife and was allowed to.
لما آخر مرة سمعت صوته سنة 2002 شهر 1/4/1، لآخر مرة لما اتصل فيني كلمت معه وهو قال أنا بخير وما قال لي أي شيء، بس كنت مطمئنة منه. هو قال بعد يومين سوف أتصل فيك وقريبا سوف أرجع إلى قطر، سوف نلتقي هناك.
But Asma is still waiting. For on the 7th of January 2002, Sami was moved to a military prison in Quetta, and the same night was handed over to the American forces, who in turn took him to Bagram prison in the middle of Afghanistan. Bagram, the prison that will never be forgotten or forgiven by those held there. In his first meeting with his lawyer in Guantanamo years later, Sami revealed some of that place's horrors.
I arrived in Bagram on January 8, 2002. I was in Bagram for 16 days, but I thought it was 16 years. They were the longest days of my life. "Where did you come from to fight me?" demanded one military policeman. "I didn't. I'm from Africa," I replied. He slammed me face first into the runway. There was blood running down my face. They kicked me several times. Then they finally took the bag off my head. It was freezing cold. They said there was no moving. I was terrified. I became totally numb, and I fell over from the cold. I couldn't move. They beat me.
Muazzam Beg, a British national brought up in the city of Birmingham, in this predominantly Muslim neighborhood. He's the father of 5 children. He was arrested in Pakistan in 2002 as an alleged member of Al-Qaeda. Released in 2005, he refused to stay silent and began to write his memoirs about his experiences in the American prisons. They start with the unforgettable days in Bagram.
لما كانوا يحققون معي في شهر ماي 2002، لما كان هذه المخابرات والأف بي آي والعسكريين موجودين يسألوني أسئلة، قالوا نحن لا نصدقك ونحن نرسلك إلى مصر، وهناك ستكون المعاملة يعني سيغير مختلفة، وهناك يستعملون الكهرباء، هناك يستعملون الضرب، هناك يستعملون الاغتصاب، هناك يستعملون كل شيء جاهز ويجوز عندهم. وهناك أيضا أرسلنا واحد اسمه ابن الشيخ الليبي، لا أعرفه لكن اسمع عنه. قالوا نحن أرسلنا هذا الرجل هنا هذا المكان، وبعد ساعتين تكلم عن حياته كلها.
"Remove your clothes," someone said, but they cut them off anyway. There was an MP with a handgun, another with a shotgun, 2 with truncheons. That's when they did the intimate body search. It was just to humiliate me. They asked my name. "Sami," I said. "You record videos of Osama bin Laden for AlJazeera," the man said. "No, I never have." "Shut up. You better tell us about it."
After that, the interrogation techniques became more brutal, to the point of dishonoring women and insulting beliefs.
مرة واحدة كان وقت الصلاة، كلنا تقريبا يعني خلصنا من الصلاة إلا واحد، أخذوا من شعري وهو يصلي وزحفوا به بهذه الطريق، وهو يصرخ ويضربه ويأخذه إلى مكان، وقال يا كلب، يعني you should be praying to me, I'm the only God you have here. يعني أنت لابد أن تعبدني، أنا إلهكم هنا. كان واحد جالس من CIA المخابرات الأمريكية، قال موزامبيق أو معظمبيق، وعمل هكذا مثل الرومانيين القياصرة اللي في وقت الرومانيين قبل أن يكون يعني واحد يكون حي أو يموت، عمل هكذا، يعني معناته أن هذا الشخص يؤمر أن يقتل. فخفت كثير جدا. وفي نفس الوقت سمعت صوت صرخة مرأة، صوت أمريكي تقول لها spread your legs، افتح رجليك. وهي تصرخ وتبكي. وفي ذلك الوقت أنا دائما أسأل الأمريكان ماذا حصل لأهلي وأولادي. منذ ما أخذوني من باكستان إلى ذلك الوقت كل يوم أسألهم ماذا حصل. قالوا نحن لا نعرف، لا ندري، وما عندنا علاقة وما عندنا كذا. في ذلك الوقت ما سألتهم لأنني أخاف من الجواب. لكن في ذلك الوقت أنا ظننت وخفت أن يكون هذه يعني أهلي زوجتي في نفس الزنزانة. الحمد لله يعني بعد شهر تقريبا حصلت على رسالة من زوجتي أنها الحمد لله رجعت إلى بريطانيا، وأن الحمد لله كل أهل والأولادكم بخير.
Constitution of the United States. Constitution of the United States. Against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Foreign and domestic.
In January 2002, the Americans turned Kandahar International Airport into a large military base and added a temporary prison with the intention of transporting the more dangerous detainees to other prisons outside Afghanistan. Sami arrived at Kandahar on the 23rd of January 2002, and Muazzam arrived shortly afterwards.
في ذلك الوقت كنت أحيانا أحاول أن أبدأ الحوار مع الأمريكان الحراس، ولما عرفوا أنني أتكلم اللغة الإنجليزية جيدا، فكثير منهم كانوا يأتون إلي ويتكلمون، وبدأت بالحوار على يعني حقيقة هذه الحرب الذين يسمون الحرب على الإرهاب. ومن ذلك الوقت بدأنا أن نتكلم عن قضية الجزيرة، فهم قالوا نحن أيضا عندنا واحد من هذه القناة الجزيرة، ما قالوا الاسم، قالوا هذا كان صاحب الكاميرا، وأيضا هو موجود في أحد الزنزانات أو الخيمات أمامي.
I was taken to Kandahar on January 23, 2002. They put me face down and stomped on my back. Fuck you was a constant refrain. I want to fuck your mother and your sister. I was present when they threw the Quran in the toilet in Kandahar.
أول من دخل أو أول المعتقلين كانوا موجودين في قندهار كلهم شاهدوا أو كثير منهم شاهدوا أن واحد من القوات الأمريكان الذين يسمون المارينز أخذوا مصحف الشريف ومزقوه ووضعوا الأوراق الممزقة في مكان البول والغائط.
On the night of the 10th of January 2002, the Marines escorted a group of prisoners, shackled and gagged, and put them aboard a military aircraft. They then took them group by group to their new prison in Cuba, in a trip that lasted about 27 hours. Sami's turn came on the 13th of June, 2002.
We were put on the plane for many hours. I was not allowed to sleep. If I did, a soldier would hit my head. I had gloves on my hands, my legs were covered, and my mouth was gagged. My hands were linked to the leg shackles. The only food was peanut butter crackers that they'd put in your mouth. The only water came from a single bottle that they'd use for everyone. If you had to go to the toilet, they'd undo one hand, and a military policeman would watch, and they'd give you no toilet paper. You could not wash. Fast, fast, they would say.
Orgullo de mi tierra cubana, aquí no hay canto en vano. Mi casa es su casa. The grass is greener on my side.
The first group of Al-Qaeda and Taliban detainees are arriving or have arrived at a detention center in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
Welcome to Guantanamo Prison. Its motto is honor bound to defend freedom, at least according to a sign placed at the entrance, though what went on beyond had little to do with honor. The Geneva Convention covering prisoners of war is not applied here. Not being part of a regular army or a recognized state, the prisoners here are classified as illegal combatants. On arrival, each prisoner would be taken to a tent to be photographed, nearly naked and shackled. He would then be subjected to an intimate body search, thrown into a cage-like cell, and made to wear the infamous orange uniform before becoming a number in the interrogation process. Sami Al Haj was given the number 345.
أول ما فتحت الرسالة كان مكتوب على الظرف من واشنطن. طبعا أنا ما فكرت صحيحا هو من واشنطن، فكرت ممكن لزقوا يعني بس العنوان يعني بخطأ أو أي شيء. أول ما وصلني فتحته يكتب كيف حالكم، نحن بخير، لو سألت عني أنا موجودة مكان اللي الله تعالى قدر علي في كوبا في غوانتنامو. وأنا لما قرأت هذا ما قدرت أصدق، صدمة كانت كبيرة جدا جدا جدا، على طول اتصلت حتى ما صدقت.
In the wider political context, what Asma does or does not believe counts for little. The big players in the current American administration of President George W. Bush regard Guantanamo as a key part in the war on terror. One of those players is David Frum, the president's former speechwriter and author of many books, including An End to Evil, co-written with Richard Pearl. In the book, the authors propose a tough strategy to beat terrorism, even in the face of international opposition.
The people at Guantanamo are very, very confident that the remaining prisoners are very dangerous people captured on the battlefield. They are not entitled to the protection of the American Constitution because they're not Americans. They're not entitled to the protection of the Geneva Convention because they're not soldiers. They are too dangerous to release. But they have no legal claim to be released. These are people who waged terrorist war against the United States, against other democratic countries, and they are going to be held as long as the terror war lasts.
Jamal Al-Harith is British of Jamaican origin. He embraced Islam in 1992. To gain an insight into Muslim societies, he went to Pakistan. He was arrested by the Taliban near the Afghan-Pakistani borders on suspicion of working for British intelligence. He was placed in the Central Correction Prison in Kandahar, together with 3 other Arab prisoners and a Russian. After the fall of Kandahar, the Northern Alliance fighters took over the prison. Jamal appears in these pictures shown for the first time with other prisoners. They're seen talking with the security head of the province, who promised to hand them over to the Red Cross as the first stage of their return home. But a few days after these pictures were taken, Jamal was sold to the Americans for $5,000 and sent to Guantanamo.
When I did get to speak to Sami inside when I was in my cell and he was in the recreation area, he told me that he was arrested and that he was a cameraman, and it was because he was Sudanese and I spent 3 years studying Arabic in Sudan. Then automatically I felt an affinity with him, and speaking to him at length for the 15 minutes that we had, that he was in the recreation area, you can see that he was mentally strong, and that I found that the people who were practicing the deen were the strongest people in there.
Martin Mubanga, another British former detainee, was one of those closest to Sami in prison.
We spoke about his going home, about my coming to visit him. He invited me on many occasions to come and visit him should we be released, about his future plans. He basically he was a peaceful kind of person, and he wasn't one to cause uproar or trouble within the blocks.
In the headquarters of Amnesty International in London, the photographer Raphael Schultz-Weissman takes pictures of Martin for his book on the Guantanamo prisoners and their families. It's a project that's taken him to a number of Arab countries. Martin spent 3 years in Cuba and has decided to tell all, everything he saw as regards torture and interrogation techniques. He was one of those who witnessed the Quran desecration incident and the prisoners' response, their refusal to receive the Quran for fear of it being mistreated again. And Sami was one of them.
Well, we witnessed basically the what is known as the Earth Team going in upon Sami and beating him and removing him from his cell and taking him to interrogation and taking him outside the block basically. At this time he offered no resistance. He only simply refused to lie down, but he never raised his arms in a confrontational manner towards the Earth Team, who I might add were dressed in riot gear and fully protective body armour, and so he offered no threat to them. But you can see the result of their going in and beating up, that he nearly, I can say, he very nearly quite lost his eye.
The emergency reaction force came. They beat us and used pepper spray on us. They took many of us into isolation. They pushed me down some stairs. They grabbed my hair and slammed my face in the concrete. There was blood pouring down from my left eyebrow. They kicked me. A doctor came along and opened the isolation window. He said, "You need stitches," but he said he'd only do it through the window, and he would do so without any pain medication.
The American prison authorities used violence in interrogating Sami and others in order to get them to confess to fabricated evidence. As days passed, the accusations against Sami snowballed. After the allegation of filming Osama bin Laden, they also added the funding of Chechen rebels, as well as the purchase of Stinger missiles and shipping them to Chechnya. In his groundbreaking book, Inside the Wire, American Army Sergeant Eric Saar relates his experience in Guantanamo as an interpreter, working in the closed interrogation rooms. At one point, he tells of an interrogation session with Sami Al Haj, which focused on the allegation that he had financed fighters. Saar has changed the names of both the interrogators and the prisoners.
The captive worked for AlJazeera, the Qatar-based Arabic news network. After his shackles were removed, he asked, "Why don't you tell me why your government has detained a reporter?" "I'm afraid I don't really have all those answers right now." She asked, "I need you to explain to me your role in financing the fighters in the area where you've been working." He replied, "I have never financed them. I will be of no help to you." But before leaving the interrogation room, she asked him one last question. "When you leave this place, will you do a story on your time here? And if you do, what will it say?" "I'm going to tell exactly what I've seen here, that the American authorities have no respect for Islam, and they are holding innocent men without charging them with anything."
London, here in the capital's business district, is the office of Clive Stafford Smith, the defense lawyer for Sami and a group of other prisoners. Clive visits Guantanamo regularly to meet his clients. His last visit was in March 2006. He disputes all the accusations leveled against Sami.
The Americans originally were alleging that Sami went to Afghanistan to buy Stinger missiles that he was going to take to Chechnya to take part in the Chechen rebellion. But this is ridiculous. You know, you were not going to go to Afghanistan when there's a middle of a war between Afghanistan and America and expect to be buying Stinger missiles that you'd put in your suitcase and take to Chechnya. I mean, it's just ridiculous. So then they changed their story and they tried to say that Sami did that in 1996, that he went to Afghanistan to get Stinger missiles. We can prove that for every single day of 1996, Sami was in the United Arab Emirates, so he couldn't have been buying Stingers in Afghanistan.
But if all the allegations against Sami are lies and fabrications, why do the authorities continue to hold him and subject him to so many interrogation sessions?
Sami has told me that he's been interrogated well over 100 times, roughly 130 times. And roughly 125 of those interrogations have focused solely on AlJazeera and on a few named AlJazeera employees. And the Americans want Sami to say that AlJazeera is funded by Al-Qaeda, that they get money from Al-Qaeda to publicize stuff on television. And this is all, I mean, it's a joke. It's George Bush has got this notion that AlJazeera is something that it just isn't, as we see in this whole business about talking about bombing AlJazeera. So Sami has become a victim of that much bigger political process where the US government wants to target AlJazeera. In the interrogations, the main focus, quite frankly, was Ahmad Mansour. And the Americans have got it in their mind that Ahmad and Sami, too, are high up in the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, for goodness sake. And I don't know where they get the stuff from. You know, I've had the pleasure of meeting Ahmad Mansour, and I find him to be a tremendously respectable journalist.
This document, published by the Pentagon, shows the interrogation techniques permitted against prisoners. It's divided into 3 categories, specifying different levels of continuous physical and psychological torture. Attached to the letter is a memo sent by the legal advisor of the Ministry of Defense to Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld for his approval. In a mocking comment, Rumsfeld asks, "I stand 8 to 10 hours a day. Why is standing limited to 4 hours?" The list of interrogation techniques allows for women to carry out interrogations. Their part in the process seems to have been aimed deliberately at the humiliation and sexual abuse of prisoners.
There was one brother who had been chained to the floor in the interrogation room, and all around him had been pictures of pornography on the wall, the ceiling, all around. Basically there was no space left uncovered without pornographic pictures, so as to try and influence and break his mind. Another brother had basically a live sex show in front of him between a man and a woman, and then the woman tried to entice him to join in, even though he was tied up, but she began to touch him and stroke him in a sexual manner, so as to try and get a response from him.
To affect the brothers more, they would use prostitutes to come in, and maybe brothers saying stories of them rubbing their breast in the person's face, putting one of the ladies was putting a hand down herself when she was on menstrual period, and then wiping it on the brother's side of the brother's face. And they would come back, and the brothers at first, when they came back, they wouldn't say anything. Some brothers would be crying.
I would be troubled by any confirmed report of abuse, but I think to believe that abuse is taking place, I'm going to need more than the raw assertion of someone who's proven to have human blood on his hands. I think people who commit murder will also lie.
But Sergeant Eric Saar was an eyewitness to the incident with the interrogator.
She wanted to find a way to break him from his reliance on God, his source of strength. She grabbed a red marker and disappeared into the ladies' room. She came out and asked the detainee, "Is Islam a violent religion?" But he did not respond. She then asked, "Did you know that I'm having my period?" She placed her hands in her pants and she started to circle behind the detainee. "How do you feel about me touching you now?" The detainee glared at her with vengeance, refusing to give in. "You fuck!" wiping what he believed was menstrual blood on his face. The detainee was screaming at the top of his lungs. At the end of the interrogation, she asked, "What do you think your brothers will think of you in the morning when they see an American woman's menstrual blood on your face? By the way, we shut off the water to your cell for tonight, so the blood will still be there tomorrow."
Things became worse for the prisoners as the abuse was compounded, from the desecration of the Quran to psychological, physical, and religious pressures. Finally, about 190 prisoners decided to go on hunger strike to draw the attention of the world to their plight. This strike was to involve the biggest number of prisoners, though it wasn't the first. To counter it, the prison authorities resorted to the technique of force feeding, so adding another form of torture to the list of those already experienced by the prisoners.
On the 12th of July, a food strike started at Camp 5 for around 190 detainees in total. Their demands included stopping the heavy-handed approach to the prisoners and to give us the health care that we need so much. Also, to stop the widespread practice of drugging the prisoners and manipulating their state of mind.
David Nicholls is an Irish doctor and a human rights activist. From his practice in Birmingham, he's taken part in many initiatives to draw world attention to the violent reality of force feeding. Here, he demonstrates how the technique is applied.
So in terms of restraint, that means either a two-point restraint where arms are being held, or four-point restraint, which means arms and legs being held, or six-point restraint, which basically means forehead, trunk, arms and legs being restrained so that the detainee cannot move at all, so that that I can then put the tube in. To take a patient in like so and then force it down basically. And keep forcing and keep pushing 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 and keep pushing. You might want to look in the patient's mouth, make sure the tube is not curling around. This is obviously going to be difficult because they're going to be probably trying to bite you or spit at you or maybe vomiting at the same time. Okay. So you then take the syringe because basically you want to know that the tube is in the stomach and not in the lungs. Because if you got it wrong, given that you've got a patient which is wrestling around, you could potentially put the tube in the wrong way and they could get an aspiration pneumonia, which could be very serious. And I think psychologically it's extremely distressing because they're undoubtedly going to be suffering pain and discomfort with the tube being put in and being restrained. Drawing back some of the stomach contents, which should be acid basically. And if it's acid, then you should be okay basically to then attach the feed. So if the tube's in the correct position, it should be in the stomach here. So I think you'll get an idea of just how long that is when I take the tube out basically. So if my hand's there basically, pulling the tube out, it just keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, keeps going, keeps going. Okay. So it really does come quite some way. And that tube's meant to stay in there, but then you've also got to bear in mind if you know, the detainee tries to remove the tube, which certainly has happened, they're going to have to try and put it in again. They're going to need to be ERF again, have the tube put in again, you know, go through the whole process again, day in, day out.
These are the shackles, the hand shackles that were made in Great Britain, in this place in Birmingham, in Perry Bar, at the Hyatt Corporation. The great irony and the strangeness is that the last time I saw these was when I was held in Guantanamo Bay, in my isolation cell in Camp Echo, when I told Clive Stafford Smith that not only he and I, but also these shackles were made in Britain. The great irony is that this place, the Hyatt Corporation that manufactured these shackles, are about 3 miles away from the place where I live in my home with my family and my children. And the other great irony is that the last time in history when slavery was implemented, this very same company, which boasts using these shackles as slave nigger collars, had transported people across the Atlantic. This is the second time in history when people have been transported across the Atlantic en masse like slaves. And the feeling that I got when I was shackled like this was that of being a slave again in the 21st century.
We wanted to ask those working at the factory about the truth behind the export of their shackles to Guantanamo.
Hi, we're from AlJazeera. We're doing a documentary about Guantanamo Bay and the shackles that are used there, plus some of the former detainees. And we understand that your company makes them. Would you like to make any comments?
I'm just supposed to work here.
You know, I mean, these type of shackles were used on them in America, and you know, you were quite upset about it. So, and you are supplying those items. It's you know, it's morally questionable, isn't it?
The employee we approached was surprised to see us. In response to our questions, he said he couldn't give a statement because the factory manager was not available.
Every single prisoner there had a psychological profile written on them. So what time they got up, if they prayed in a group, if they prayed at night, when they did wudu, how many times they did wudu, anything they did, what they eat, what they don't like to eat, and if they ate, and everything was written down on each individual and kept. And on that profile they would build up an idea of what this person's like and how to mentally get to this person, or if they can try and physically or mentally break him.
Well, personally, whilst in Africa, while I was picked up in Africa by the Zambian authorities on the request of the Americans and taken from motel to motel, questioned by them, they asked me to work for them in Maghreb or in various places in South Africa, but mainly in Maghreb, and they asked me to work on their behalf, but I refused.
Sami was subjected to both coercion and inducements. Apart from the torture and humiliation, he came under pressure to work as a spy for American intelligence.
I don't know of a single prisoner in Guantanamo who hasn't been asked to be an informant for the United States. Definitely Sami is meant to be a spy on AlJazeera. Now, Sami wouldn't do that for a second. He is a remarkable, remarkable person. He could have made his life so much easier if he had just agreed to do what the Americans want, but he hasn't. So that's a real tribute to him.
جاءوا اثنين من المحققين FBI الذين كانوا يحققون معي في بغرام، وهنا هددوني، قالوا نحن نطلب منك يعني مرة ثانية أن يعني تشتغل معنا، وإلا موجود الآن مكان الإعدام.
When I came back from interrogation, I spoke to a Yemeni brother and told him about what the Americans had asked me to work for them. And he told me that a lot of brothers had been asked by Americans to work for them but had refused. And he pointed over to a brother from Saudi who had, I assume had been an imam in Saudi. And so the Americans had offered to release him, and that when he goes back to Saudi, that he would become an imam in Saudi with a mosque that they would give him, and give him extra money, but as long as he would report back to the Americans in Saudi, from Saudi.
Jamal is still searching for an answer to this irony. How does the dangerous criminal one day become a trusted undercover agent the next, supplying his former captors with information? In his book Guantanamo, America's War on Human Rights, British author David Rose tells some of the prisoners' stories and the abuse they suffered. He also analyzes the American motives in linking torture and recruitment.
I'm very interested to hear that they tried to recruit Sami after interrogating him, because I've always suspected that part of the agenda at Guantanamo is to try to recruit agents, to break people down to the point where they would re-enter their own societies and perhaps work as spies or agents. When you look at some of these bizarre techniques, cold, heat, deprivation of food, so hunger, music and so forth, these are not normal interrogation methods.
The United States does not torture. What we have seen during the debate over Guantanamo is that some people want to expand the definition of torture to mean compulsory feeding of people who are on hunger strike, to mean isolation, to mean psychological techniques aimed at persuading people to talk. These are not torture.
Hello, brother.
How you doing?
I'm Brian.
Brian, my name's Martin.
Martin? Hello,
Yeah.
Martin.
Yeah. You've been campaigning here for a little while.
Too long, yeah.
Sure.
Nearly 5 years now.
Nearly 5 years.
Yeah.
It's good. I'd like to show you some things about against the war and about torture, about people who've been kept in Guantanamo Bay, like by the Americans and the British government's inactivities that do certain things and that. So maybe I can just Start with, this is the brother that we're actually complaining about. His name like Sami.
Sami?
Yeah.
He's beautiful, isn't he?
Yeah.
How do you know about this then?
Well, basically because I was there myself.
You were there?
Martin headed to the British Parliament. In the square outside, Brian Howe has been campaigning non-stop against the wars waged by Britain and America, and their tragic consequences, the killing of children, the destruction of cities, and the torture of prisoners.
Yeah, basically I was just like telling him about this brother Sami.
After talking about Sami and the plight of prisoners, Brian recites a poem which he's just written.
Fair to Blair. I'm torturing Tony, genocidal Blair. Where the bombs are falling, where the helpless folk are calling, where the shit hits the fan. Believe me, I was never there, which is why we need the ones who were there, like you, Martin, to come and tell us. Come and tell us. Cry to the heavens.
So, you know, like you had a poem, I too have a little poem, probably not as good as yours, and I don't think that's long, but you know, I'd like to dedicate the poem to Sami and the brothers, basically, and it just concludes like, in short, how I feel about Sami, about Guantanamo, about the situation, our situation. So let me tell you about a brother called Sami. Him come from the place them call the Sudan, me the back in Guantanamo Bay. So just sit back outside and just say, hey, what I say now, Bush. Him did have a look plan, yeah, Bush. Him did try break my man, yeah, Bush. Him did have a look scam, raise a look arm and invade Afghanistan, yes, Sami. There's a need for you to fret, yes, Sami. There's a need to have regret, yes, Sami. Just to step back and to check the fact that you was Muslim, big up and enough respect, yes, Sami. Yeah?
Bless you, bro.
Okay.
Bless you.
Hoping to meet again soon, the two men part. Brian back to his non-stop vigil for maybe years to come. Meanwhile, Sami's booklet will become another item of evidence to be added to Brian's display of abuses. As for Martin, he decides to send a message to Sami's family.
سامي هو كان رجل طيب وكان رجل صالح وهو رجل ممتزم وفي أي وقت أنا كنت حزين وكان فخرني يجعلني يعني فرحان ومرتاح ومرتاح وكذلك يعني أنا أريد أن أفعل شيء له لأسرته حتى يعني أنا أريد أسرته يكون يعني فرحان أيضا ومرتاح شوية يعني لا تحزن وخروج من الله ونسأل الله قريب.
A few years ago, Martin was labeled an evil terrorist. His innocence finally established, he was released, but without any apology. These days he's trying to get back to normality, not easy after his bitter experience in American hands. But normal life is still an illusion for Asma and Mohammed as they wait in Doha for Sami to be released.
مرة كتب لي رسالة قال أسمع أول رسالة لما وصلني مع صورة محمد بكيت بكى شديدة جدا. طبعا هذا رسالة أثرت فيني وأثرت فيه. وهو كتب لي رسالة لمحمد شهر سبتمبر 19 سبتمبر سنة 2005. كتب لي محمد رسالة، في رسالة كان يناشد محمد يقول إلى بسمة حياتي، إلى ابن الغالي، إلى فلذة قلب محمد، أنا مشتاق لك كثير جدا جدا ومشتاق لرؤيتك، إن شاء الله قريبا سوف أكون معك.
The Guantanamo experiment has been based on a fallacy, the idea that if you crush somebody, you will get something valuable. But the truth is, if you have the wrong people in the first place, people who have been bought from warlords in Afghanistan for $5,000, if you have people who are being denounced in land disputes, or people like Sami, who are just completely innocent, who are working journalists, you cannot find anything useful about terrorism. All you do is create tremendous suffering. Now, I interviewed a very senior Pentagon intelligence analyst who I quote in my book. And he said to me, I think that for every prisoner locked up in Guantanamo, we perhaps create 10 future terrorists. I think that might be an underestimate. Maybe it's 100, but what's clear to me is that they have created terrorism. They have not defeated it with Guantanamo.
Guantanamo is a unique penal institution. It complies neither with the laws of man, nor, Muslims and those of many other religions would argue, with those of God. The American government's justification for the prison's existence is that a unique threat, that of Al-Qaeda, requires a unique response. But natural justice, say human rights groups, should be paramount. The right to a fair trial allows neither exception nor compromise. The only crime of Sami Al Haj, according to his supporters, was to be in the wrong place at the wrong time while doing his professional best as a cameraman. Prisoner 345 should be tried or freed. And until that happens, it will not be Sami who is judged, but the system which has detained him without charge or trial for the last 4 years.
Dear Clive, so we had to go back on hunger strike again. It's not something I look forward to, but I must. We have to stand together on this, more for the prisoners who are being mistreated in Camp 5 than for anything else. I hope to survive it alive. But please, tell my wife and my son that I love them.